Hi. So, part of large group, maybe my favorite part, is the part where somebody comes and tells a Bible story. That's the part I get to do. Here's a Bible story. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem, in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where's the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw his star rise in the sky and have come to worship him." When Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all of the people's chief priests and the teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, are in the land of Judah, are by no means the least of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time that the star had appeared in the sky. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go search carefully for this child. And as soon as you find him, come report to me so that I too may worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star that they had seen reappeared in the sky over them, and they followed it until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and they worshipped him. And they then opened up their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their homes by a different route. That's from Matthew 2. You're going to read that in the small groups that you're going to be in the next coming week, but there's a little spoiler for you. I want to start by saying thanks. It's something Lucas said earlier, but I want to repeat it. There's so many places you could have been tonight, and you chose to be here. And I appreciate that. And I know lots of other people in this room do too. So thank you. And thank you especially to those of you who drove a pretty long distance to be here. My freshman year, I commuted a pretty long way to school every day, and I know that it is a challenge to be a commuter, especially when you're driving more than a couple miles. In fact, I brought a small gift with me tonight, and I want to give it to whoever in this room had to drive the longest distance to be here. So if you want to pull up that next slide. Got a little, it's InterVarsity, so it's going to be a Big B gift card every time there's ever a gift or anything. So here's how we're going to figure this out. I want you to take out your phone if you think there's any chance that you drove the longest distance to be here, and punch in your home address into your GPS. So open your map app, punch in your home address, and to be specific, I'm talking about the place that you are driving home to tonight when you go to bed, okay? So if you are here from out of state or another country, that doesn't count for tonight's purposes. It's where you're driving home to tonight. Once you punch that in, it should tell you how many miles it would take you to drive home. Has everybody got that? Looks like we're good. While you have your phones off, go ahead and turn off the sound just to be safe. Whoever has that saxophone ringtone, it was going off about 20 minutes earlier. All right. Hopefully that gave you time. So we're looking for miles, not minutes. Want to know distance, not time. So if you driving home tonight will drive 10 miles or more, stand up.
Ooh.
Wow. Those who have to drive the furthest are all towards the back so they can get to the parking lot quickly. All right, how about 12 miles or more? Stay standing. Okay? About 15 miles or more. Sorry. Were you at 14?
Yeah.
All right, 17 miles or more. All right, let's keep this moving. 20 miles or more. 20 miles or further. 22 miles.
Mine's 40.
Let's skip to 40 miles.
That can't be. Or no.
41.
No, we're not 40.
So you're driving 40 miles away? All right, you definitely went this far. What city do you live in?
South Lyon.
have our congratulations and our sympathy. Hope you enjoy your gift. Speaking of gifts, who here has started their Christmas shopping? Really? All right. This many people? All right, you're closest, Deontay. You already bought a Christmas present?
I started noting my Christmas presents and the price
Oh,
stores.
okay, so you're pricing them out, making your plan. Has anyone purchased a Christmas present for anybody yet? You have? Or what's your name? Aben. Aben? Do you mind telling us who you bought a present for?
Bought something for my sister and for my dad and for my mom.
Nice.
Wow.
Why so early?
When I just kind of always have my eye open all times of year, so when I see something, I'll snag it and then wait till Christmas to give it to them.
Nice. That is impressive. You and I are the exact opposite in that way. We have, I think, 89 days till Christmas, but who's counting? And I probably 87, 88 days from now will start my Christmas shopping. But I feel like I have to talk about Christmas because it's a Christmassy story for today. I was talking with some friends last holiday season, and we were just comparing stories about childhood Christmas memories and things like that, when I realized that I apparently missed out on what seems to be a kind of a staple Christmas present that every other kid got when they were kids, which is a personalized storybook. You want to bring that slide up? Some of you probably know what I'm talking about. You've probably seen something like this before. You maybe even got one as a gift from a parent, or much more likely a grandparent. This is kind of a grandparent gift to give. But in case you're not sure what I'm talking about, these books are basically like any other kid's book that you might get. Have big, colorful pictures on every page, just a few sentences on each page. Unlike any other kid's book, in these stories, they're completely customizable, where they will put your name in as the main character in the story. So this means, for instance, if you're buying this book for a little kid named Sam, the protagonist of the book would be named Sam. Now, more often than not, these stories have something to do with Christmas, so little Sam would go on some sort of Christmassy adventure to go meet Santa Claus, or to go see baby Jesus, or something like that. My brother had one of these. Bobby visits the North Pole. And my sister Sarah had one too, but for some reason, I never got one. Yeah, and I'm bringing this up because I want your sympathy, because I think this really stinks. I always wanted to find myself in one of these Christmas stories, but instead, the closest I ever got was to finding, Bobby or Sarah in one of these stories. That is, until a little while ago, when this conversation was happening, when a couple of my friends pointed out that I am indeed in at least one Christmas story. In 1970, a stop-motion animated Christmas movie came out called Santa Claus is Coming to Town. So it's kind of like Rudolph or Frosty the Snowman, that kind of movie, only not nearly as popular. But Santa Claus is Coming to Town tells the origin story of Santa, how Santa got to be Santa, kind of tells the story of young Santa. And according to my friends, I resemble young Santa. Now, I'm not sure that I agree with this, but I did bring a picture so we could compare. I'm not convinced.
Yes.
Let's just check real quick. So that was a thrilling discovery for me, as you might imagine. At some point, I should probably do my actual talk. All right. Our story for today is, as weird as it seems for mid-September, a Christmas story found in Matthew chapter 2. And it's a story all about a long journey and gifts. And my hope is that by the time we're done here tonight, we will each be able to find ourselves in this Christmas story. Now, our story begins with a group of magi in the east. Now, with just that phrase, magi in the east, an image probably popped into most of our heads. We see 3 white guys with beards, except for some reason, sometimes one of them is black. And they are dressed in shiny, over-the-top, colorful robes, wearing little tiny crowns because for some reason they are also kings in addition to wise men. And they are riding on camels with ornate Christmas presents strapped to the back, and this absurdly giant star is shining in the night sky, like 10 times bigger than the moon. Sure, this is basically the picture we have in mind, right? Before we go any further with this story, I think we should probably take a second to scrub this picture from our minds and replace it with the picture actually painted by Matthew in the real story in the Bible. If we're going to learn anything from the characters in this story, we're going to have to see them for who they actually are. So let's start with the number. I know that the song says that there are 3 kings, but there's really no number given in the book of Matthew. We just traditionally think of 3 magi because they come bringing 3 different kinds of gifts. The truth is, there could have been a lot more, and there's really no way of knowing how many magi there were. I do know, though, that there is no reason to imagine these guys as kings. There is plenty of talk about kings in this story, but nowhere is it even insinuated that these guys are royalty. It would be, I think, symbolically lovely for kings to kneel down before little baby Jesus, but that's just not what these guys are. What they are magi, mystics from the ancient Arab world. The East here most likely means the region now known as like modern Saudi Arabia or maybe Iraq. So these guys probably looked a lot less like characters from Lord of the Rings and much more like your neighbors and your classmates. And in the ancient Arab world, many people practice a sort of spirituality that's centered on astrology. So for them, the night sky held all sorts of secrets, the mysteries behind so many profound truths, including the future. The Magi were then, for lack of a better term, sort of pastors or priests of this ancient Arab astrological religion. They were well known, not just in their homes, but throughout the entire world for their ability to understand great mysteries and to recognize momentous occasions. These are the men traveling from the east to Jerusalem in Matthew chapter 5. Erase the glitzy European kings on camels from your mind and substitute dusty Arab astrologers. If you want to bring up that next picture. You can still keep the camels, because those are probably historically accurate. I mention all this not because, or at least not only because, I sometimes fantasize about hosting a sort of Bible nerd version of Mythbusters, which would still be pretty cool, but also because the rest of this story takes on new shape once we have a clearer picture about who these magi actually are. The men who arrive in Jerusalem aren't Christians or Jews or traditional staples of religious imagery. They are foreigners, Gentiles, operating within a spiritual worldview that had almost nothing to do with that of every other person in this story. Which is why it's a little surprising to me that when the Jewish population of Jerusalem meets these magi, they seem almost immediately so accepting of the claims that they bring up here in verse 2. Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews, the magi ask. We have seen his star and its rising and have come to worship him. In other words, they notice this new star in the sky, and apparently this star symbolizes the birth of some new important king in Judea, and they have come, as was their role in the ancient world, to pay homage to this newborn king. And I expect the people of Jerusalem to shrug these guys off, to dismiss them as misinformed eccentrics or as exotic weirdos. After all, Jerusalem already had a king, King Herod, and King Herod hadn't made any big baby announcements lately. Also, astrology wasn't really part of their cultural or religious vocabulary, at least not in any sort of central way. It's just wasn't what they were used to. And yet, when they hear this news, the whole city starts to buzz, including King Herod. Now, maybe they are just so eager for God's Messiah, for God's chosen, promised king to arrive, that they are willing to latch on to any rumor, no matter what its source is. Or maybe King Herod is just so paranoid about someone else trying to swoop in and steal the throne that he will chase even the most unlikely story. Or maybe they had a hunch that although these guys didn't have the whole story, they weren't completely off track either. After all, they had arrived at the heart of Judea during a time when everybody else was yearning for their promised king to finally arrive. As we will see in a minute, they came to the wrong town, but they can't really be blamed for that, right? They knew that a Jewish king had been born, so they went to the one city where every Jewish king, from King Herod all the way back to King David, had lived. They, in other words, did the best they could with what they had at their disposal. They followed the only star they had, which is where the priests and the Bible scholars come into play here in verses 4 and 5. They had this crucial information that the Magi lacked. After all, this was their story, their identity. They were God's people waiting for God's promised redemption. It was their job, their calling to recognize God in the world. So, yeah, they knew where to find Jesus. They tell the Magi in verse 5, in Bethlehem. Apparently, this is common knowledge at this point, that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. Common knowledge, that is, for those who knew the Bible, for church people like these scribes. There's no way, however, that these Magi could have known this had the Bible scholars, these church people, not told them. So what we get here, if we're paying attention, is a cool little glimpse of God's people doing exactly what they're meant to do. They are pointing other people to Jesus. From the start, this had been central to their identity. God's mission of reconciliation and redemption that started all the way back with Abraham and continued through Moses and David and is finding its culmination here in the birth of the Messiah was never meant to be for just one group of people, never meant for just one religious community. It was for everybody. Good news of great joy for all people. The Jewish people, those who knew God, had a special role to play in all this, an opportunity to be a light to the nations. They had been called to welcome in outsiders into God's family. So it's kind of exciting to see this play itself out at this point in the story. But then, and this is the part that really gets me about this story, the thing that I just can't wrap my mind around. When the Magi hear this news and they set off on their way to Bethlehem, they travel alone. None of the Bible scholars, none of the religious leaders, not even a random dude from Jerusalem goes with them. They knew where to find Jesus. They knew how to tell other people, but they couldn't be bothered to go with them and see for themselves. This was the moment that they had been waiting for. This was the climax, not only of their lives, but of their entire religious history and identity. And yeah, I get that they may have been skeptical, that they maybe weren't quite positive that this was all legit. And yeah, these Arab Magi would have made unusual traveling buddies for them. It might have been even a little bit scandalous for them in their time and their place, but at the same time, they didn't show any signs of skepticism or scandal back when they first met the Magi or when they were quoting the Bible at them, to them. So why not go with them? It's like a 5-mile trip from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. What do they have to lose? A day, maybe 2? Isn't that a small price to pay for even just a chance to meet your Savior? The Magi had traveled well over 1,000 miles to reach this moment. A journey that must have disrupted their lives for over a year. So why not accompany them for the last 2 or 3 hours? And yet, they don't go. They stay in their city. They read their Bibles. They do their jobs. They go home for dinner. And they never even know what they missed out on. and we never hear about them again. The Magi, on the other hand, arrive in Bethlehem and meet Jesus, and when they do, they are overjoyed. And overjoyed here is the word used in our English translations of this story, but it is a huge understatement. The actual Greek in this sentence is probably the most redundant sentence in the entire Bible. If I'm going to try to translate it more literally, it would be, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. Rejoiced with joy, greatly, exceedingly. It's like an explosion of celebration. They give this baby gold and frankincense and myrrh, whatever those are, the most famous exports of the ancient Arab world. And then they fall to their knees and they worship Jesus. This is not the first time the word worship pops up in this story. It pops up earlier, but in that case, it most likely means something like honor or pay homage, like you would if you met a king. But here, in verse 11, the language seems undeniably religious. They are literally worshiping this baby. They had come looking for a king, but instead they found God. As if to emphasize this point, the very next sentence tells us that these magi receive a divine warning. They hear directly from God and head home via another route. And that's all we know about these guys. I would love to know more about their story. I would love to know just what is going through their heads as they make this long journey back home. I can't imagine what it must have been like for them, how different their lives must have been from that point on. After years of search, of following the only light they had, they finally met the true light of the world. While the religious people waited around back home, and the king plotted some horrible crime, these outsiders found Jesus. Which brings up the question that I want us to consider tonight. Probably the most important question, as important as the would you rather questions were tonight. I want us to think about this question. If you want to pull up, it's probably 2 slides ahead now. Yeah. Where are you in the story I just told? If someone was to hand you this story as a personalized Christmas storybook, what character would get swapped out for your name? Maybe you are a lot like the Magi. At this point, you wouldn't really call yourself a Christian. You don't identify as that. You're kind of coming into all this from the outside. But you are on a journey. And you know that. You know that you're looking for something. You are following the only light that you've got. Maybe that light is love, or family, or purpose, or peace. And although those things, love, family, purpose, peace, those aren't God any more than a star in the sky is God, but maybe those things are the light by which God has been leading you in the right direction. After all, somehow, for some reason, you are sitting here tonight with an opportunity to meet the one that you've been searching for. These things that we long for, beauty and relationships and justice and spirituality, being part of something bigger than ourselves, these things that are hardwired into who we are and yet always seem to elude us and slip through our fingers, these, I think, are each a glimpse of the God who made us and the God who is rescuing us through Jesus. This is the message of Christmas, but also the message of Christianity, the message of the incarnation, that God stepped into our world in order to reconcile broken relationships and to undo injustice and to offer true, beautiful life and to welcome us back home. When you find that, when you find Jesus, you just can't help but rejoice with joy, greatly, exceedingly. But maybe that's not you. Maybe you are one of us who relates more with the Bible scholars in this story. We are part of the in crowd, the church people. We know where to find Jesus, and we're happy to point other people in his direction. We are quick to quote the Bible to whoever will listen, quick to tell our friends and family to go find Jesus, but for some reason we just aren't nearly as quick to get up and go with them, to walk alongside them in this journey, because frankly, we're a little bit skeptical and a little bit scared. Some of the people we love, especially the people we love the most, so often seem so far away from Jesus. Some of our neighbors seem so different, and some of our co-workers and classmates seem just kind of hopelessly out there, adrift. If only we could see how far God has already brought them. If only we could look past how foreign and different their whole perspective seems and see God leading them by their star. If we could see this, we would be quick not only to introduce them to Jesus as their journey's destination, but also to walk with them the rest of the way, even if it takes a little while, even if it means finding Jesus where we don't often expect him, even though we know that's where the Bible tells us we're most likely to find him. And then again, maybe neither of these groups of characters sound much like you. You might relate more with one of the other characters in this story that I haven't talked as much about. Maybe you relate most with Mary and Joseph. Not only are you close to Jesus, but God has been using you lately to bring Jesus into the world. You have been welcoming people into your life, into your home, and you've been introducing them to Jesus. And when they meet Jesus, you have been joining in their celebration. And if that's where you are right now, that is amazing. And I'm excited for you. But maybe you are most like King Herod in this story. You are part of the community of God's people, and you have been for a long, long time, but you have grown so distracted by your own goals and your ambitions that you have completely lost sight of who you are and who God is. Maybe that's why you're here tonight, just for the chance that you might find yourself, you might find God again. If you've paused long enough to notice at any point in the midst of all this, you'd realize that in your efforts to secure your own future, you have somehow found yourself actively opposing Jesus. Like Herod, you know that if Jesus is king, that means you aren't? And that scares you? And if that's the case, Herod's role in the story stands as a warning to me, and probably some of you as well, that you can be part of a church, part of a Christian student organization, and not be part of God's family. After all, Herod had been circumcised. He'd been christened. Herod knew the Bible. Herod worshipped in the temple. Herod, fun fact, built the temple. And yet, when Jesus stepped into the world, Herod was first in line to try to kill him. Just because you've been baptized, just because you've said a prayer, just because your face pops up in a church directory somewhere, doesn't mean that you're on Jesus' side. We're all in this story somewhere. The question that we need to consider is not whether or not we're in this story, but where exactly we are. And that's a question that I want to give us a few minutes before we take off and try to figure out who killed whoever, in Clue. That's a weird thing to say. Before we move on to that, I do want to give us a few minutes to continue thinking through this question and to start considering what the next steps might be. So in a second, we're going to bring these little response sheets around. Is that okay if we do that now? And there's going to be a few different questions on here for you to respond to. But the whole bottom part basically gives you a list of characters from this story and asks you to choose the one that you most relate to. And that includes kind of an underlined response that goes with that. So you're going to have about 5 minutes to quietly, silently read through these and fill them out. And then Rachel's going to come up and kind of lead us into continued reflection in response to that.